of a sudden, down there, I see this van parked. And I see three guys on top of the van, and I could see that they were like happy. You know, they didn't look shocked to me. You know, they didn't look shocked. I thought it was very...
And at that point, we were taken for another round of questioning, this time related to our allegedly being members of Mossad. The fact of the matter is, we are coming from a country that experiences terror daily. Our purpose was to document the event. Our purpose was to document the event.
They did it. I have had long conversations over the past 2 weeks with contacts at the Army War College, at its headquarters Marine Corps, and I've made it absolutely clear in both cases that it is 100% certain that 9/11 was a Mossad operation. And what I showed them immediately afterwards, the third building at the World Trade Center going down, WTC-7. And they look at that, and I said, now you understand that if one of the buildings was wired for demolition, all of them were wired for demolition. And what Americans need to understand, they did it. They did it. And if they do understand that, Israel will flat out disappear from this earth. 9/11 has led directly to 60,000 Americans dead and wounded. God knows how many hundreds of thousands of people in other countries that we've killed or wounded or made homeless. If Americans ever know that Israel did this, they're going to scrub them off the earth. And they're not going to give a rat's ass what the cost is. They are not going to care. They will do it. The Zionists are playing this as truly an all-or-nothing exercise. Because if they lose this one, if the American people ever realize what's happened, they're done. It'll be a bloody, brutal war, and they're gone. I mean, it's not even going to be a close contest. 3 buildings went down. The third was not hit by a plane. It was wired for controlled demolition. Therefore, all of them are wired for controlled demolition. You know, what I have done when I presented it to these people, and I said, just look at this. Look at this picture. You know, I'm not going to give you an argument. Just look at it. And they look at the film, and without exception, they come back and they say, they did it, didn't they? I said, yep, they did. They did 9/11.
Alright everyone, so you've seen the video, or the compilation of clips that I put together, and what happened to Omar Khadr was this. He was in Afghanistan with his family, and he was a third party there. He wasn't an Afghan, but he was an invader. And what happened was the members of the United States Armed Forces pretty much wiped out his house and killed most of the members of his family, if not all of them, or all the ones that were in the building. So Mr. Khadr, from what I can recollect from the story, he threw a hand grenade and ended up killing an American. Now, that American shouldn't even have been in Afghanistan. Right after 9/11 happened, if America wasn't controlled by Zionists and Israelis dual citizens, the American Armed Forces would have went to Israel and they would have straightened them up. But as it turns out, their armed forces and our armed forces and armed forces from all over the world, basically it was like someone made a 911 call and sent the police to the wrong house. And when those armed forces showed up in Afghanistan, they started killing all the wrong people. And we lost people in this process. I put my nation before anything, like, you know, Basically, I don't put it before any religion. My religion is Canada, pretty much. And I think that we should know the truth, you know. So I don't think Mr. Omar Khadr was a terrorist. I think he was just defending himself. Basically, he was in a country as a guest, and the Americans were perhaps a guest of the people that didn't like the Taliban, which is fine. But the reason they went there wasn't to help the Taliban's opponents out. It was supposedly to stop terrorism so that events like this wouldn't happen again. But the Muslims were framed for this one. And Mr. Khadr received a big settlement. Now, our soldiers didn't get a big settlement, and people like Stephen Harper and the Conservative Party and also the Liberals, they pushed these guys away. They put them under the table. When they come home, they, you know, they're not treated very well, the soldiers. We know the story about homelessness, and apparently their medical benefits aren't the best either once they get back. So I think that we should search our souls in Canada and see who the heck it is we're voting for. All right? So Mr. Omar Khadr spent some time in Guantanamo Bay, and apparently the RCMP or somebody showed up there and screwed him over for his rights, and he came back and he got $10 million. But our soldiers didn't get anything. I mean, we can't bring back our dead soldiers. No money in the world can bring that back. Even if Israel paid reparations for this, our guys are still dead. And people are making laws that say that we can't criticize Israel, when, to me, in my opinion, I believe they're the ones responsible ultimately for us losing, what, 158, 159 guys, you know, and killing who knows how many people. And the Americans lost a lot, as Mr. Sabrowski said. He didn't say Omar Khadr should be scrubbed from the face of the earth, all right. Omar Khadr was a 14-year-old guy. Doesn't mean that they can't be terrorists at that age. Anyone, you know, can do things that are dirty, you know, or, you know, harmful to others. But I don't believe Mr. Khadr deserves the title or the label of terrorist. And I believe that these events were part of a plan called the Greater Israel Project, and a man named Oded Yanan came up with this idea. I heard it was 1979. I think there's a magazine article in Israel in an Israeli magazine called Kavunim. And in 82 they mentioned this, where they're going to try to expand Israel to its biblical borders, or Judea. I think it goes from Egypt over to Iraq or Iran, and then north to Turkey. And all these Muslim people that have been displaced are part of an ethnic cleansing, I believe, to make room for this Greater Israel, to get rid of some of their enemies, also to make Europe and North America weaker. It seems unwise to bring people to Canada that we've been harming. It seems like they're bringing the victims of our actions closer to us, and it's compromising our security, because they have a legitimate reason to be upset with us. I mean, nobody that I know would want this to happen to innocent people, but there are people like Zionists and Freemasons and things like that that are reputed to work with these kind of folks. And really, I don't think they're doing much good for our country and into Europe and North America by bringing the people that are the victims of our crimes near us, to put us within arm's reach of them, so they can throttle us, you know, for doing this to them. Because in North America and in Europe, basically we are guilty of not standing up to the Zionists and actually backing their aggression with our military and becoming puppets for their will, an extension of their will. All right, so, well, there's one more thing too. One of the reasons I think that the Muslims are being targeted by the Zionists is because the Zionists run banking. And the Muslims, besides the Zionist Jews, know very well the harm that can come when you charge interest on money. Because if you're the only person that prints money in the world, all you have to do is basically charge a nickel of interest for all of the money in the world, and the world will never be able to pay that nickel of interest back, because you're the only source of money. There's no other place to get it, you know. A nickel could enslave the world, all right, because they print the money, and the interest is imaginary. so no one ever printed that. So a nickel would do it. And the world would just keep having to borrow more money to catch up to that nickel, which they never would. So the Muslims are smart that way, where they don't like interest, okay? And it's a mathematical thing. It's pretty simple. It's if the origin, like I said, is from a banker, and they're the only source of money in the world, all they have to do is ask for a nickel's worth of imaginary money that no one ever will get. Then the whole world's enslaved for the rest of the time. Every nation's got to print its own currency. And not let Zionists do it. It should be national institutions in every country doing it. And the Muslims are aware of this. Now, I'm not proposing that we go full Muslim. I've seen a bit of their religion. I've seen excerpts from the Quran, and the people I meet are generally pretty nice people on the streets, but I mean, if they ever get the upper hand, it'll be worse than Christianity to the Aboriginals here. Let me tell you, I'm pretty sure about that. But there's one religion that I think is even worse. And it's when you see yellow vests and stuff like that, and they're talking about Sharia law, for some reason, and it's maybe because Masons are reputed to worship like phalluses and things like that, and there's this Kabbalah book of mysticism in this series of books called the Talmud. And I've looked into the Talmud a little bit, and basically I've concluded that the Talmud is like the Quran on crazy pills, all right? It's even worse, believe it or not, to all you, Islam aficionados out there, the guys that, really don't like Sharia law. I don't blame you for not liking it. I'm not a big religion fan. I think in a country like Canada, where we have the face of humanity here, the last thing you need are religions to put people at odds with one another, all right? But in a nutshell, my friends, I think that Omar Khadr is a victim of 9/11 as much as our soldiers were, all right, as much as our whole nation was. And our freedom is becoming victimized by it as well. When they don't want us to talk about these things, all right? I remember 2015, I think it was March 15th, I believe I read that. Don't know if it came out of Stephen Harper's mouth or not, but there's a report from his government that said that they're going to look into charging people with hate crimes if they criticize Israel, all right? They call it anti-Semitism. And when the Russians lost the revolution to basically the Jewish Bolsheviks and the Freemasons, the first law that was enacted was the law against anti-Semitism. They're not really Semites, they're just white Europeans like myself, all right? Semites are from the Middle East. I had a teacher, Mr. Chisholm, in grade 13 sociology. You're thinking, what's a guy like you doing in sociology? Well, it was an easy course, so I took it. And it was interesting, I've got to say. And Mr. Chisholm one day, as we're leaving the class, he says, by the way, everyone, a Semite is from the place where they speak the Abrahamic language, and he meant natives, It's kind of like I was born in Brantford, but I'm not a Mohawk, okay? So I'm not from that race, like the Aboriginal race. So the European Jews aren't from the Middle East, all right? They're from Europe. They picked up the religion in Europe. Okay, guys? So when they say anti-Semitism, they just mean anti-communist, basically, is what they're really saying. And I don't go for people telling me that I can't criticize communism. All right, my friends? So, in a nutshell, I think Omar Khadr is not a terrorist. He was a victim of all this. Now, to give the guy $10 million, I'm not against compensation, but you don't put our soldiers last, all right? You don't put our people last. There's people on the streets, things like this. I think they did that to create hatred, just like Bill M103. I'm sure a lot of Muslims were pretty much opposed to it, this Islamophobia thing. I think they're bringing these people here. If you notice the CBC, pardon me, if you ever listen to the radio broadcast like I had this weekend a couple of times just by accident, it's all to do with racism. They're always pushing racism. They're pretending that they're against it, but basically it's always on the news. It's always on the programs. First it was a Chinese gentleman or alleged Chinese person on the radio. I couldn't see him. And he said something about how Caucasians were bugging him and things like that. Perhaps, perhaps not. And also then they tried to go against Aboriginal people, saying how, there was a black girl, then she grew up in the Aboriginal, world, and they didn't like her as much because she was black. I mean, they're just pushing this stuff all over the place. Us Canadians are good people, and I just hope we can see past the tricks of the CBC and the communists, the Zionists, because it was the Jewish communists that invented the term, Leon Trotsky invented the term racism, pardon me, And Leon Trotsky's real name was Lev Davidovich Bronstein. He wasn't Russian. Alexander Solzhenitsyn said about the Russian Revolution, he says they weren't Russians. He says they hated Russians, all right? He says the reason you don't hear about it is because they control the media. Alexander Solzhenitsyn spent a lot of time in the gulags after he was a military officer during the Second World War for Russia. He must have criticized the government or something and got sent to the gulags. All right, he won a Nobel Peace Prize for literature. He wrote the book, The Gulag Archipelago. It's a pretty long book, like 7,000 pages. That's what I believe it is. I've heard a bit of it on the audiobook, but I haven't heard the whole thing yet. But Mr. Solzhenitsyn seems to be the opinion that Zionism isn't a good thing, all right? It's pretty bad. Like, they killed 66 million Russians there. A few million Ukrainians. So, anyway. And again, I don't think Omar Khadr is a terrorist. Okay, I'm not a fan of the religion. But I certainly would not call that man a terrorist. I'd call him a victim, just like our soldiers. Just like us, having to live with these lies all the time. The Muslim people themselves are some of the biggest losers in all this. What happened was they got displaced. Like I said, they've been ethnically cleansed. They've been sent here. I feel that they're trying to grind them up here, like they're creating a lot of animosity against them. And by their sort of like a superior supremacist type nature in their religion, I mean, they're going to band together. And they're going to try and outproduce us and things like this. But I think it might not be too long before someone tries to create some real violence here in Canada. And it's up to us as citizens to be aware of what's going on. And I hope we can prevent anything like that from happening. I'm trying to wage a war of words here. I call it unarmed combat for my people. But these laws are going to make it very difficult to do that. They're going to use violence against us and put us in jail. They've already done that to James Sears and Leroy St. Germain. Monica Schaefer got sent there to a prison in Germany because a Jewish terror group called B'nai B'rith basically told on her. And they arrested her in a courtroom. Her brother's in jail in Germany right now. He's a Canadian, but he's also a dual citizen with Germany. So these groups are terror groups, okay? They make you afraid to speak your mind. And Omar Khadr got $10 million. Well, these terror groups got $40 to $45 million to terrorize Canadians into silence, okay? You know, you decide, okay? I mean, maybe none of them should have got the millions. But to give $45 million to Jewish terror groups to throw us in jail, like the Center for Israel and Jewish Affairs and the Wiesenthal's and all these guys you always hear on the news, acting like they're the good guys talking on behalf of all Jews. Guys like that, Alan Sobrowski, are real nationalists, okay? They put their country first. I'm the same way. I've got a Jewish ancestry. I put my nation first. These guys are harming Canadians. I stand up against them, all right? I know the difference between Zionism and just regular people. You know, people with DNA, who cares what it is? As long as your heart's in the right place, that's what matters, all right? All right, guys. You guys have a good day. And keep an eye out for what's going on. These are some greasy tricks they're trying to use against us. All right, good day, everyone.